WCNC Charlotte. This is Flashpoint.
Hey folks, thanks for joining us here for Flashpoint. I'm Ben Thompson. Perhaps one of the most underreported stories unfolding right now in Charlotte. Private firms buying up single-family houses. City leaders have told us here on Flashpoint for years affordable housing is the biggest issue facing Charlotte. It's never been tougher to be a first-time home buyer here. And what's making it even more tough? You're up against Wall Street-backed landlords who own more than 11,000 single-family homes here in Charlotte, flipping them then into rental properties. And it's perfectly legal. We'll have more on that coming up in just a moment. But first, a broader view at the market as it stands right now. Some encouraging news. Experts say more houses are hitting and staying on the market. According to Redfin, new listings across the nation jumped 4% over the month of June. However, according to Canopy Real Estate here in Charlotte, inventory has fallen by 51.8% year over year. The price of homes still high, though. In June 2021 data, the median sales price of $335,000 and the average sales price of $406,000 rose 18.4% and 21.9% year over year, respectively. Joining us today is Eli Portillo, the Assistant Director of Outreach and Strategic Partnerships at UNC Charlotte's Urban Institute, also a longtime reporter and writer over at The Observer as well. You might know the byline. He's joining us today to give us an assessment of the real estate market and bear down on some of the issues. Let's start as sort of broadly as possible, Eli. What is making this, and I know it's multifactorial, but what is making this such a difficult market for folks trying to buy a house?
Well, for people who have been in Charlotte for a decade or more, this really feels like the polar opposite of where we were after the Great Recession and the housing crisis then. You know, we've gone from a situation where we had a glut of houses on the market where prices were way down to a situation now where houses are selling very quickly. There are very few on the market at any one time, and prices have really increased sharply. Demand has stayed high. The pandemic has prompted people to want to look to maybe move out of the apartment or even move out of a larger city and move to Charlotte where they can have more living space. So there are a lot of factors driving this. One number that I think really makes this concrete is that in 2014, according to the local Realtor Association, houses were on the market for an average of about 104 days before a sale. And now this year, that's down to 13 days. So that really just kind of hammers home how much quicker, hotter, and more competitive the real estate market has become.
Have we seen any relief, just say in the last couple of months? Any signs that things might be getting a little bit better?
Well, prices have continued to climb really quickly. Inventory, the number of houses for sale, is up slightly in the Charlotte region from its low point. You know, it bottomed out in March at around only 2,700 houses for sale in the whole 16-county region that includes Charlotte. That's a really low number. You know, if you go back just to 2014-15, there were around 15,000 houses for sale. So a really big decline there. We've seen that inventory come up a little bit. Nationally, there's been, you know, a little bit of a slowdown in house sales, slight. And people are wondering, you know, will it be rising interest rates? Will prices finally get too high? What will cool this off? I don't think we've seen a real relief yet. And if you're out there still trying to buy a house, you certainly know that it doesn't feel a lot better.
Listen, you know this as well as I do. City leaders will tell you that affordable housing is the #1 problem here in Charlotte. Yet you have these private firms buying up single-family homes, more than 11,000 of them here in the county, about 5% of the homes on the market, then turning those into rentals. And we know that homes are really one of the biggest wealth builder for a lot of families out there. Those families now being denied, forced to rent. Give us an idea of how this is happening. You've sort of led the way on this reporting, and I think it's been underreported for a large part. How is this happening?
So this is a really big change in how the housing market and the rental markets for single family homes works. You know, prior to the Great Recession, This was a really fragmented market, kind of dominated by mom and pop landlords, local folks who had an extra house or two. Maybe they invested in a few houses and rented those out. But after the Great Recession, when housing prices fell and there were a lot of foreclosures, short sales, distressed properties on the market, firms with Wall Street backing and national reach stepped in and started buying houses in large numbers and creating portfolios of rental houses. And they really focused especially on fast-growing cities in the Sun Belt and the Southeast. And Charlotte has been a really hot market for these companies like Tricon, American Homes for Rent, and Progress Residential, a few others. They've purchased, we did an analysis and found they've purchased about 11,500 houses just in Mecklenburg County. They also own more in surrounding counties. And that's as of this spring. So we know they've continued to buy, and I expect that it's increased since then. It's really interesting because they don't focus on equally across the Charlotte region. These purchases are really clustered in areas, kind of in what we've traditionally called the crescent, north, south, and east, north, west, and east of Uptown, and also in fast-growing suburbs like Steel Creek, the Huntersville area, the North Lake area, these kind of really fast-growing suburbs. And these companies have created a whole new business model where they have permanent rentals for in neighborhoods that didn't used to have them, and they've continued to add to their holdings here in Charlotte pretty aggressively.
And let's be honest, if you're a first-time home buyer, what are your chances up against one of these firms?
Well, what we found is that on average, these houses that they've purchased in Charlotte have about a $200,000 to $206,000 appraised value, and that's on average everything they've bought. That's well below the average in Mecklenburg County, which is about $325,000. So what that tells me is that these companies are coming in and buying a lot of starter homes, a lot of homes on the lower end of the price spectrum. And that's where first-time home buyers are more likely to be concentrating their activities as well. So even though it's a small percentage, less than 5% of the total single-family homes in Charlotte, as you mentioned, it's really concentrated in the part of the market that first-time home buyers want to be. And that's also where we've seen the biggest inventory crunches. So, last month, the local Realtor Association said that across the entire 16-county Charlotte region, there were only about 950 homes for sale that cost $250,000 or less. So less than 1,000 houses for sale across the entire region for less than $250,000.
Eli, what boggles my mind, though, is everything you just said, and local leaders will say affordable housing is our biggest issue. We know they're buying up a lot of the affordable housing, but there's nothing that city leaders can really do about it. Am I correct in my understanding there?
There's nothing that I'm aware of that would allow, the city to block a company from buying housing. These are private firms buying private property in private transactions, and that's the way our real estate market works. I think there are also some issues you get into when you talk about, say, banning rental housing in single family neighborhoods. You can get into some equity issues there, because a lot of times if you do that, if you tried to do something like say, okay, single family neighborhoods can't have rental housing, that's what we're going to do to try to keep these companies out, then you're kind of locking out a lot of people who might not be able to afford to buy a house there. And that's one of the things that these companies will tell you. They'll say, well, we are buying houses that people can't afford, and we're turning them into rentals. So we're actually opening these neighborhoods up to more people who either can't or don't want to buy a house. And I think coming on the heels of the debate we've had about single family housing in Charlotte and whether we should allow more duplexes and triplexes, I think it's worth considering our attitude towards rental housing, because a lot of times, that can become kind of discriminatory. You hear people who don't want rental houses in single family neighborhoods, and it's a complicated issue, but I think it's worth considering the equity implications as well.
100%. And I think most people understand that becomes a slippery slope. But then in some cases, you're talking about they're buying up entire neighborhoods.
Yeah, that's been a pretty new trend, and I think that shows how much demand there is. There are some new single-family neighborhoods being built that will be for rent forever, and that's a really big change. Big companies like Crescent Communities here in Charlotte, they've opened a build to rent division for housing, and that could be something that, that kind of thing could lower the amount of inventory we see added. We're already in a situation where we need a lot more housing built, a lot more for sale housing built. And now we have more builders turning to rental housing and more companies turning to, buying up new houses, not foreclosures, not distressed properties, not short sales. They're buying new houses. For example, there's in Loso or Lower South End, there is a new townhouse community that's being built, and it's about 80 some units. The entire thing is going to be bought by Fundrise, which is sort of a crowd-funded investment platform, and turned into rental housing. And they're paying an average of $417,000 for these townhouses. So that shows you that these companies that started off buying, cheap properties, distressed properties, foreclosed properties, there's so much demand and there's so much money that they are now willing to pay top dollar for brand new houses. And that's a big change and could be a really significant shift in our market going forward.
Final question. If a Wall Street firm comes in and buys my neighbor's house, what does that mean for me? Or I mean, is it necessarily a bad thing? Or what is this doing to a character of a neighborhood, I guess I should say, that a Wall Street firm, not that it's a rental. Rentals, I mean, people in my neighborhood are Airbnb-ing their house all the time. I don't think that's the issue, but the fact that it's a Wall Street firm that owns the guy's house next door.
Well, I think there are a few things to keep an eye on. There have been national reports. There was a big piece in the New York Times last year about these companies with people who rent in them alleging that they are not responsive to repair requests, that they're very quick to evict folks. And I think that's something to keep an eye on, especially as the eviction moratorium ends sometime in the next months. We know it will sooner or later. We're going to have to watch. Are these companies evicting people more quickly? Are they keeping the properties up going forward? Those are all things that can be destabilizing to a neighborhood. There are some places where they have a lot of properties, multiple properties on the same block. If you have a bunch of people who are being evicted or a bunch of houses that are not being maintained in these clusters, that can have an impact on the neighborhood, and not because they're rental properties, but because of these other issues we're talking about. So I think those are things we need to keep an eye on going forward, and that will definitely be worth studying as we see this eviction moratorium end sometime in the coming months.
Interesting topic. Thanks for coming on. Keep us posted on how this changes, because I think it's going to be an ongoing issue here in Charlotte and across much of the country. Eli Portillo.
Thank you.
Honestly, one of the smartest guys to talk to when it comes to Charlotte development. Eli, thank you, sir. We appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Have a good one.
All right, you too. More Flashpoint coming up after this, including the crazy things people are doing to win bidding wars here in Charlotte real estate.